Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki a hau. A ti he mauri ora, ina mana, ina rio, aura rakatira mā tēnei koutou katoa. A tēnei ka tūraro e te maru o ngā mana whenua, a ka te māmoe waitaha kaitahu nau mai hara mai tauti mai. Ki te whare tūnei, tēnā koe, tūtonu. Ina mata haere hoki atu rā ki te pō. No o te poti ahau, ko Richard Blakey Takawingawa, ko Kotarani ta iwi, he kaimahi ahau te whare wānanga o tākou tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, welcome here tonight to an inaugural professorial lecture at the University of Otago. My name is Richard Blakey. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Enterprise, and I'm going to be your MC for tonight. My main job is to get out of the way and let the main event happen, but there is a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that our Vice-Chancellor and our Chancellor send their apologies. They are on university duties in Central Otago this evening, so can't be present in person. Perhaps they are joining our online audience, I'm not sure. I'd like to also acknowledge, though, those of you that have come to attend in person and those that are joining us online in live stream or maybe viewing this wonderful occasion virtually at another time. Welcome and thrice welcome you all. These are occasions for the university, but also for our communities, our public here in Dunedin, in Otago and the rest of New Zealand. And so welcome to this event celebrating the promotion to Professor of Ali Knott. Ali has some special visitors here in the audience, Malay, Mia and Helen, and I pass on my acknowledgements and thanks from the university for your role supporting whānau and Ali in the days and the weeks and the years that have led up to this wonderful occasion. I believe there are actually people that may be live online in the UK, in France, and even the North Island, so welcome to you all. This is a great thing to celebrate, promotion to the position of professor here at the University of Otago, and it's a distinction that is not awarded lightly. It does require demonstration of significant achievement in the areas of teaching, in research and in service at the level that we call sustained outstanding leadership and competence. And it is that outstanding leadership over a sustained period that is critical. And Ali, as you will see tonight from the introduction that will be given by the Pro-Vice-Chancellor and his talk, it will be clear how that has been expressed in the work that he has done in artificial intelligence and other related areas. But for me, this is an area where the demonstration is very clear across all of those areas. In teaching, Ali has demonstrated development of curriculum in an area that is rapidly changing. The need to be research informed in our curricula is vital, and that research has informed this curricula in this area. In research and engagement with industry, that is outstanding. Of many students, I think a understated fact went in that one of Ali's students now leads $1 billion company, or a company that's attracted more than $1 billion of investment. His current work is split between academia and industry with soul machines, as we'll see through the talk. But it's also service beyond the discipline, and work from the university that we are most grateful for includes work with colleagues in humanities, law and social sciences in the Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Public Policy, looking not only at the ways that this work can benefit us commercially, but also the risks that might be associated with artificial intelligence and new technologies, and working with colleagues in law and philosophy to really be at the leading edge of that. We are deeply, deeply appreciative. So, Ali, on behalf of the university, congratulations on this significant achievement. And it's now my pleasure to invite the Pro-Vice-Chancellor from the Division of Sciences, Professor Richard Barker, to give you a more detailed introduction for the lecture that we're about to hear tonight. Kia ora.
Professor Blakey, tēnā koe. Professor Knott, tēnā koe. Professor McCain, tēnā koe. Friends and colleagues, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Alistair Knott, better known as Ali, to give his inaugural professorial lecture at the University of Otago. As just indicated by Professor Blakey, Ali is one of our newer professors at the University of Otago, having received a well-deserved promotion to the position in February of this year. Ali was born in the UK, England more precisely, but I will let him tell his own story. But one bit of extra information I can share is that although born in England, he did most of his schooling in Brussels, where he attended a European school with classes held in several different languages. He credits his interest in linguistics to having been reared in this environment. Although he has been living in New Zealand for more than 25 years, he still thinks of himself as European, in fact, very passionate pro-EU. Now, I presume that Ali is aware that Britain recently left the EU, and we can read into this that perhaps Ali is disappointed at that turn of events. My suggestion then is that Ali take this up with Boris Johnson. It turns out they're old mates. Ali and Boris went to the same European school, where Boris was a couple of years ahead of Ali. Ali, in his briefing notes for me, speculated on why it was that Boris evidently learnt nothing while he was at school of any real value. And then there was some further speculation on what would have happened had their roles been reversed. I guess that would mean that we would be about to hear the IPL from one Professor Johnson, and we could all look forward to the next hour filled with chaotic musings. Back to the factual. Ali received his BA Honours from the University of Oxford before heading to Edinburgh, where he earned his MSc and then PhD. At the same time, he was employed as a research associate in the Human Communication Research Centre. Ali joined our Department of Computer Science in 1998. He was employed as a lecturer and thus has successfully worked his way up through the academic promotion process, culminating in this, his inaugural professorial lecture. As Professor Blakey has already indicated, appointment to professor at the University of Otago is far from easy and requires all-round ability. It is not enough to excel in one area of academic endeavour, you must excel in all. In research, Professor Knott has more than 110 peer-reviewed publications which speak to the breadth as well as the depth of his research area. His work has been recognised through significant grant success, and we can point to recognition from Te Aparangi Royal Society of New Zealand, who awarded him a prestigious Marsden grant in 2013, as well as a grant from the New Zealand Law Foundation in 2016. Professor Knott's research has had impact outside of the usual norms of academia. He has 6 patents to his name associated with his work at Soul Machines, an Auckland-based technology startup that is going from success to success, as we just heard. His teaching is also excellent, both at the undergraduate level and at the postgraduate level. He has supervised 22 PhD students to completion, 2 of whom have been recognised on the Division of Science's Exceptional Thesis list. Professor Knott's promotion also recognises his service to the university and professional communities. This includes significant roles in his home department, particularly with a focus on support for Māori and Pacific students. He was also co-founder for our Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Public Policy, or as he calls it, our very own Ministry for Magic. Nationally, he was a founding member of New Zealand's Artificial Intelligence Forum, and internationally he has served on the editorial boards for 3 significant journals, including Cambridge Elements and Semantics, as well as serving as program chair or committee member for a large number of international conferences. Of course, we are not the only ones to recognise that Ali has talent. Alas, Ali and Mele are off to Victoria University to take up new positions. We are going to miss you both terribly, but I wish you all the best in your new jobs. And as much as it pains me to say this, I know you will give Victoria your best, as you have both done for us here at Otago. I would just like to say a personal and very public thank you to you both for all that you have done. One practical matter that Ali asked me to mention is that having sold their home in Dunedin, they now have 2 cats looking for new and kind owners. So on that note of feline opportunity, I shall finish and ask that you please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Professor Alistair Knott.
Hi everyone. Very nice to see you all, I must say. So yes, malo e lei, malo ke tau lava I e whiawhini. Tēnā koutou ko Cyril, roa ko Helen Mary, o ko mātua no Ingalani, roa ko Persume ahau, ko te wave ni taku awa, ko tofoa, te maunga, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Very, very nice to see you all here. Just delighted, and I'm very happy to be doing this. It's really quite a pleasure. So, yeah, I'm going to tell you something about me, I guess. It's like an extended mihi. So, as with all mihi, I guess it starts with me being little. And I have to say that I wasn't always an extremely powerful magician. There were times when I was young, when I was just a simple village lad, really, in the small settlement of Swindon. And there's me, in all innocence. But gradually, as you grow and start to understand some things about the world and start to question the world and think about the world that you're in and the place that you play in it and the role that you have in it, you start to sort of encompass and take on the world of the intellect. And that certainly happened for me around adolescence. And there's me at the age when I suddenly started taking an interest in the world and my place in it and what it was to be a person, I suppose, and have thoughts like that. And I was very lucky. As Richard said, I went to a school in Belgium, and in this European school, one of the subjects on the curriculum was philosophy. And my first collaborator, my friend Phil, which we had lots and lots of interesting escapades and did all sorts of interesting things together. Not all of them completely legal. Anyway, at school, I had some very good teachers, and one of them was a philosophy teacher. We had to learn philosophy in our school, and not all the students appreciated it, but I just lapped it up. I thought it was wonderful stuff. It's just, I guess, a way of thinking, which I just really appreciated. I think that was the place where I first got launched on this journey of academia that I find myself on. So that was one huge influence. Another big influence was my mum, actually, and there she is in the picture on the right. My mum was also a teacher at this school, and she taught me for some of my time there. She was an English teacher for one of her jobs, and she was very interested in everything to do with language. And I think, again, that sort of like started to sort of inculcate this interest in language, which is what I've been doing my whole career, I guess. And there she is talking to a garden gnome just to demonstrate her linguistic interests. So those were 2 very strong influences. And actually, my mum was really interested in poetry, and in particular, well, actually in all sorts of things, but the thing that kind of lodged in my mind was the poetry of Shakespeare, and in particular his sonnets. And I'm going to just stick up a couple of sonnets where I can just remember sort of looking at and mulling over when I was, a high school kid, and thinking how amazing these are. But I had this sort of interesting thought about them, which is very linguistic, which is to think, well, these are the sonnets that Shakespeare wrote, but he could have written others, right? He could have written other sonnets. There's this kind of whole space of possible Shakespeare sonnets, and this is a super kind of, it's like a linguistic way of thinking about the world. It's like there's this sentence and this sentence, but there's these other possible sentences. There's an infinite number of possible sentences, an infinite number of possible sonnets that he could have written. And I found myself trying to work out what the structures were and how you could create other ones. And actually, I was quite sort of I was quite mechanical about this because I had like a very simple village computer from the early 1980s. And so I sat down and tried to program something which would make Shakespeare-like sonnets. And that part, I have to say, even though Mum sort of taught me how to see things in a way, my father certainly taught me how to build things. And I was definitely inclined not just to sort of think about this space, but to get in there and try and kind of tinker and produce something like a Shakespeare sonnet. So I went away and did this, and here, my mum actually found these in some deep archive somewhere, and there they are, as fresh as the day that they were written. Oh, then vouchsafe me but this gentle lip. Oh, then vouchsafe me but this precious fear. And you can sort of understand how it's done. It's like, template filling or whatever. But I was extremely interested by this. And I won't dwell on these, other than to say that there's quite a lot of breasts in my sonnets. And, you can sort of imagine a young boy. Actually, there's breasts in Shakespeare's sonnets too, so I don't want to say that I'm the only one. He was a young man as well. Writing to men and women. Who knows who I'm writing to? It's a pretty weird creature that I'm writing to here. So, yeah. Here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. There's breasts all over. But I got interested in this kind of stuff. I was interested in how the human mind could produce language and what the human mind was doing when it was producing language. So imagine my surprise when I received an invitation to attend the Oxford School of Magic. And there it is. That's the college that I went to. And that's the library. That's the upstairs library. It's very nice. You can't really call it an information services building, but yeah, it was a lovely library, and you could nip into those little alcoves and study there, and I studied heaps. And I had some very inspiring teachers there as well. And I just want to pick out a couple of people. One of them is John Driver, the guy on the left, who, goodness me, he was a postgrad at the time, but he ended up being one of the most eminent psychologists in the UK. And I had the experience of having my essays kind of commented on by him every week. It was just extraordinary. It was like the things he writes, how perceptive and clever he was. And on the right is Anita Aphromedes, and she taught me philosophy. And it's just the same. It was just like a really rigorous kind of feedback process. And I really tried to bring something of the flavor of the supervision that I got from them to the interactions that I have with my students. Yeah, so there was one other person who I talked to called Jocelyn Payne, who was far less academically prestigious. And he taught me Prologue and taught me how to use computers, and I did a course on that. And again, I was still thinking about poems, but now, because I was an Oxford student, I was going to make really, really powerful poems, much more powerful than the ones I produced at school. And so I found a copy of the Oxford English Dictionary that was online in the mid-'80s. That was like on a floppy disk, oh my God. So I was very pleased with that. And then I wrote myself an actual grammar in Prologue, indefinite clause grammar. I said, I'm going to link this powerful grammar up to this huge English dictionary, and now look what poems I will produce. So I put those two things together, and actually the results of that have been mostly lost to history, except for one line which I can remember, which is, needle, oh narcotic tuber. I think it was doing something combining definitions of dictionary words. It's like, I was somewhat disappointed, but it just shows you that becoming more powerful doesn't necessarily mean producing better stuff. That's actually of the badness of the very worst poetry in the universe, probably. Anyway, I continued doing that stuff, and I thought I was so interested in this kind of grammar hacking, grammar engineering stuff that I decided to pursue it in the Edinburgh School of Magic. And there is a piece of the Edinburgh School. I think it's part of the museum. And there, I had, again, two amazing supervisors, Robert Dale and Chris Mellish. And yeah, I was really interested now. I'll take the picture away. What I was interested in was, in particular, like for my postgrad, my thesis, I was interested in not the structure of sentences, which is what I was mostly thinking about with those poems, but the structure of extended text. What is it that makes a text of several sentences hang together? Like if you took a newspaper article and you rearranged the sentences, they wouldn't make sense anymore. So what is it that makes a sentence, an extended text cohere? It's not grammar, it's something else. And the interesting answer there again had this kind of mechanical kind of implication. If you knew the answer to that question, then you should be able to produce coherent texts for all sorts of applications. For instance, in dialogue or in generating descriptions online. And in fact, some of the first online generated text on the internet, on the web, was produced in projects that we did back then. But my main thought was a theoretical one. I was interested in this idea that a coherent text should somehow connect to a coherent thought. I mean, it's not a super new idea. In fact, you can trace the idea way back. I've got a picture here of Thomas Hobbes, who I really like. And I'll have a little quote for you from Thomas Hobbes, which is just a beautiful piece of language, really. But it summarized the way I was thinking about language above the level of a sentence. By consequence or train of thoughts, I understand that succession of one thought to another, which is called, to distinguish it from discourse in words, mental discourse. When a man thinketh on anything whatsoever, his next thought after is not altogether so casual as it seems to be. Not every thought to every thought succeeds indifferently. And I really like that expression, and I think words are like that. So I was very interested in what is it that takes you from one thought to another thought? What's a coherent train of thought, and how does that get manifested in text? And then at the end of my thesis, I went back to sentences, and I thought to myself, well, if a coherent text reports a coherent train of thought, then the individual sentences probably also report meaningful units of thought. And I got thinking about the correspondences between syntactic representations of sentences and kind of cognitive processes. So in Oxford, I'd learned about those processes, cognitive processes. And in Edinburgh, I learned about how sentences were structured. And so I found myself with this question: does the syntax of a sentence have anything to do with cognitive processing? Or what does the syntax tell us, if anything, about cognitive processing? Does the syntax of a sentence kind of offer an interesting new empirical window onto what's going on in the head, of the sort that's normally studied in psychology? So just to kind of hook back, one thing that's nice to do in these things is an academic whakapapa, and there's this very interesting sort of ancestry behind my two supervisors. So Robert Day on the left, you can trace him back to Richard Montague, who's one of the early formal semanticists. So he sort of was exploring this idea that the meaning of a sentence is a kind of a mathematical function or logical function of the meaning of the component bits of the sentence, plus the syntactic structure of the sentence. And the guy on the right is Wittgenstein, and Chris Mellish, my other supervisor, kind of whakapapas back to him in a way. And so Richard Montague had this very formal kind of compositional semantics model of sentences. And Wittgenstein, at least the later Wittgenstein, I might be stretching this a little bit, but he was definitely keen on the idea that language wasn't just in the head. Language was a public phenomenon and needed to be studied as a public activity rather than just thought of privately. And therefore, language had to connect to the external world. And so those were ideas, I think, which kind of I was picking up on when I was in Edinburgh. That wasn't the only thing that was going on in Edinburgh. There was other magic going on. That's where I met my lovely wife, Mele, and it really was a very, very happy time for me back then. She was over visiting from New Zealand, and and we met all sorts of other interesting people. I've just put a couple of them up here, so shout out to Oren and shout out to Lars, who both ended up in our wedding in Tonga. So that was a very nice time that we spent when we were in Edinburgh then. Okay, Mele dragged me to New Zealand. Well, at least she brought me. I wouldn't say drag. Inveigled me to New Zealand. I thought I would come to Otago for a few years, and I have ended up being here for like almost 25 years. So the Otago School of Magic, just look at it. It's by far the best school of magic. If you just look at it, that is absolutely the place to be for magic. And I was in a great place with all sorts of extremely mysterious and magical people. I'm just putting some of them up here. I'm sort of selecting them by the order of which they look most magical. So just look at these mysterious creatures of mystery. So I'm not going to name them, but I chose photos that emphasize their magical properties and powers. So there they all are. And it's been a wonderful time with all of those people. So what have I been doing here since I arrived? I'll take a few slides to introduce that. Firstly, I had two beautiful daughters, Mia and Helen. We've already had them mentioned. Yes, Mia and Helen, it's been fantastic fun watching you grow up, and you were very nice when you were children. You're also still really, really cool. And one of the things I also wanted to say was that coming to New Zealand has meant being in the Pacific and connecting with Mele's Pacific family. I've got a picture there of Mele's cousin Liki and of Mele's granny Meliane, and I just want to acknowledge that side of the family too. So down to the academic work, I'll go quickly through this. I can't do any talk without using the word sensory motor, so there it is. So the question I found myself with at the end of my time in Edinburgh was, does the syntactic structure of a sentence tell us about cognitive processing? And I spent like maybe 12, 13, 14 years thinking about one action, which was a person grabbing a cup. And that's a strange thing for a linguist to do, but that's what I did. It's a concrete sentence. It's the sort of thing that you can actually do in experience just by looking at the world. You don't have to do anything with memory. You just have to watch the world and engage with the world. So you can think of it from two perspectives. If you're a linguist, you can study the syntactic structure of sentences that report that in all the different languages of the world, because of course, this can come out in lots of different ways. If you're a neuroscientist or a psychologist, you can study the brain process involved in actually grabbing a cup or in watching someone grab a cup. And my real question was, what have those two things got to do with each other? And to a large extent, the people studying this stuff on the left here, the linguists, went to separate conferences and published in separate journals from these neuroscientists who studied sensory motor processing. And I was very interested in just bringing these two fields of research that I happened to know about. I happened to know about both of them, and I was very interested in the overlaps between them. And my thought was that they really do have deep connections between them, and potentially this is an interesting new discovery about the relationship between language and the processes that allow us to experience the world. So I had this really detailed idea, which is this, that the syntax of a sentence that reports a concrete event, no matter what it is, if it's the sort of thing that you can see or do, then that syntactic structure is basically like a kind of trace or a description of the sensory and the motor processes that are involved in actually experiencing that event. And I'm not going to spell that out in too much detail because that's not the purpose of here. But I just wanted to sort of break it down a tiny bit. So when you grab a cup, it feels like a big continuous thing. And when you watch me grab a cup, that also just feels like something that just happens overnight. But really, if you study the processes that are happening in the brain, you can kind of identify a discrete sequence of processes, or at least that's what I was claiming. And there's several other suggestions along those lines. You can identify that this happens, then this. And so, for instance, if I'm watching someone grab a cup, I can say, first of all, I attend to them, then I attend to the cup, then I monitor the hand onto the cup. Or if I'm doing the action myself, I have to somehow attend to myself as well as an agent, as the agent of the sentence. I have to decide that I'm going to act rather than watch. And then I have to attend the cup before I reach for anything. And so there's an order there. And on the syntax side, there's also a kind of, and basically the building blocks over here are all the same sorts of things. Which in cognitive science they call deictic operations, which are operations that are referring to the current focus of attention or something like that. On the syntax side, there's also this interesting idea that any sentence is broken up into basic building blocks. And the basic building block that I picked up on in my account was called the X-bar schema. And so you can each one of these squares is basically like a Lego piece that you plug together in order to get the syntactic structure of a sentence. And my suggestion was that those building blocks here correspond to the deictic operations inside here. And from that idea, there is this deep connection between sensory motor processes and syntactic processes. There's this interesting insight that you might sort of suggest about how language evolved, basically. Where did language come from? What was the pre-adaptive platform of language? And the suggestion I made, based on this kind of close connection between language and the sensory motor system, was that maybe language emerged as an adaptation of the sensory motor system. So I developed that idea, again, kind of like mechanically, in an actual implemented program with a colleague, Luba Binuskova, and her PhD student, Martin Takac, who became a very close collaborator of mine and still is. And we built a neural network model of language learning that drew on those ideas. And the model, basically, to kind of say it very simply, simulated what a baby has to do when she is learning her native language. And she has to learn somehow, she has to experience events in the world, and those events have to be mapped onto the utterances that she hears that language speakers in her language community use to describe those events. And I won't go into any detail about that, but our network could learn lots of languages with lots of different sentence structures and lots of different orderings and lots of interesting kind of syntactic phenomena, which I won't go into any detail here. So that was one thing I did in Otago. Another thing I did, which I'll describe a little more quickly, was modeling human-machine dialogue. And again, that interest of mine came from my interest in my PhD at Edinburgh in models of text coherence. So some forms of extended text are monologues, but other ones are dialogues involving one or two or three more people. And I built a dialogue system in partnership with Te Tumu, which is the School of Maori Studies and Pacific Studies here and Indigenous Studies here at Otago, and also a little bit with the Higher Education Development Centre here at Otago. And our project was done with my great collaborator, Peter Vlugter, but also some people at Te Tumu, John Moorfield at the bottom there, and Craig Hall and Tori Wetherill at the top, and from HEDC, Jenny MacDonald, who subsequently became my PhD student. And it was fantastic fun to have the computer scientists, like me and Peter, learn Maori, and to teach the Maori people something about computer programming, and so we could work together. It's an extremely productive program of research. And we built this really interesting dialogue-based tutoring system, which was deployed, it was designed and deployed in an introductory Maori course that runs here at Otago called Maori 110. And I was going to give you an example of the English dialogue system for speed, basically. It's just something that allows you to engage in a conversation with the system. And the idea was that these conversations are a natural way of helping a person who's learning a language become fluent. And in Maori, there's this thing that often arises where people who are Maori feel shy to speak their own language, or whakamaha is the word that's often used. And one of the thoughts we had for this system was that if you can interact with a bunch of computer characters to start with, that might help you overcome some of your whakamaha and help you use the language with other people. So that was a very interesting project. But I'll move on. While all this was happening, from the year 1998 to now, basically, AI has been through this crazy revolution, and that's kind of like another dimension of what's happening here. It's changed beyond recognition since I came to Otago, even in that short time, and that's why I have this word magic in the title, really. These days, AI systems almost are so good that you think, what, this is just like, it's indistinguishable from magic. Lots of technologies like that, but AI in particular, because it simulates human abilities. So anyway, my students, they didn't initiate any of this revolution, but they were certainly watching closely. And I just wanted to shout out to some of my students. Corin, he was one of the very earliest people looking at the use of neural networks inside statistical parsers. Mike Little, he was one of the first people to use the vector-based word representations that are now commonplace in all language models. He was looking at Joshua Bengio, the pioneer's work, very soon after he did that. Hayden Walls was using convolutional nets for visual object classification very soon after, well, way before they became fashionable, I should say. And then a bunch of other students who did work not in language, but on the sensory motor side, so motor cognition or models of vision, and I want to call them all out as well. So the final thing I'll talk about in terms of what I've been doing here is this work that has already been mentioned with the company Soul Machines. So that company was started by this guy, Mark Sagar, and he was originally someone who worked in computer animation. He built models of faces that were incredibly realistic and could pull extremely realistic expressions and could talk very fluently. And he worked in Hollywood special effects, basically, and they still use a lot of his technologies in that field. But he got interested in moving beyond just face animation to thinking about the brain or the cognitive system that animates the face, and more broadly than that, that animates the whole body. So he was very interested in this idea that the brain is embodied. It sits inside a body that has to interact with the world, that's got a face that can observe the world, and senses that can observe the world. And yeah, he started building this interesting model. He came back to university in Otago, in Auckland, and started working in his lab on building a model of a baby, and then trying to teach the baby about the world, the physical world that the baby finds herself in. And also building models of human dialogue systems using grown-up faces, like the one you see in the bottom right there. So that was kind of too much of a coincidence to be true. It was like Mark, when I first was interacting with him and found out about it, he was saying, I've got this digital baby that needs a model of the sensory motor system and also of language learning in babies, and also I need a model of dialogue. And I was like, well, I can do all of that. So I joined Soul Machines. So Soul Machines was one of those projects that started in the lab and was just too good not to be taken up commercially. And so it was like venture capitalists were all over this thing. And so it was founded in 2016, and thank you very much to the Richards and to Michael Albert, who was HOD at the time. You were all very enlightened about this and said, okay, you take this commercial contact and let's see what happens with that. And I came on board as soon as it was founded, and so did my colleague Martin Takac, who helped me build the neural network model. And right now, I mean, the company is absolutely part of the AI revolution. It's just the blue touch paper has been lit and off it's gone. It's like made, getting on $200 million in New Zealand dollars in venture capital funding. It's got over 200 staff. It's got offices all over the world, even though these days people mostly work from home. So what am I doing up there? I'm helping to design the cognitive model that animates these digital agents. And that's an incredibly interesting job. And I feel very lucky that I'm working with a really interesting group of people. So some of these people are people who are working on the cognitive modeling team and the AI team, and there's a mixture of old-fashioned AI people, and then a bunch of really keen, new, and extremely talented people who work in the new AI, the neural network-based AI. And then on top of that, there's also a group of people from the developmental psychology group in Auckland University, led by Annette Henderson. And if you're working on a digital baby, you need to know how real babies are. And so we have this incredibly interesting academic kind of research interaction with that group. And I've put Melly on the end there. Melly is not in Soul Machines officially, but I spend a lot of my time bouncing my ideas about baby development off her, because that's her area of research as well. And so I very much feel that she's part of this. So I've got a tiny demo. It's a very short demo. It was made by one of our own Otago graduates, Joseph E. Jefferson, who is a neuroscience graduate here, but also did computer science. And this is an advertisement. So this is a model which has been built by many people, but she is the person who's interacting with this baby. And what she's going to do is to move an object on the screen, and the baby's going to watch it, and that's event observation. And then she's going to learn a word that describes the object, and then she's going to do an action herself, which is event execution. So just watch.
Hey baby, let's have some fun. Professor! It's the professor. Can you find the professor, baby?
Professor.
Yeah, that's right. Nice work, baby. Put him on the duck.
Yeah, so that's Baby X. And that's just a tiny demonstration. Baby X can do lots and lots of things, but I just want to give a very minimum sort of round trip of the kind of things that we're working on there. Okay, so I'm also helping Soul Machines develop its ethics policy. And AI ethics is a huge area, of course, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But for one of the reasons I wanted to join this company was that I'm very interested in AI ethics, as many of you know, and I felt that it was important to be in industry thinking about AI ethics rather than just sitting in academia thinking about it, because industry is where all the actual developments happen and where stuff gets deployed, and so you want decisions about AI ethics to be made in companies rather than just be thought about in universities. So I'll just mention a few things. The models that we build, the systems that we build, allow people to talk to digital agents on the screen. And the digital agents are looking with a camera at the person and registering their expressions and the emotional contours of their. So there's a lot of very private data there, and it seemed super important to make sure that Soul Machines doesn't become like a company whose product is its data, like Facebook is, or like Google is to some extent these days as well. So when we were building the AI ethics policy, we built in various requirements that data had to be kept genuinely private and couldn't be sold, which go beyond like the regulations of the GDPR, for instance, and predate the GDPR. We also have policies about who we're going to engage with as clients. We don't want to take on anyone. We have some policies there. So, for instance, tobacco or arms manufacturer. We don't want to go anywhere near that stuff. And, there's lots of money in some of those applications, but we don't want to go there. We also have some really interesting policies relating to diversity of our digital agents. And so one of the really interesting things about Mark's face model, or the face model that's been developed in the company now, is it's extremely parameterizable. And so you can model, again, what I would describe as a space of possible faces, just like a space of possible text I was talking about before. And this means that we have to kind of think carefully about all sorts of issues to do with diversity, both in terms of ethnicity and also in terms of gender. And I've had some really useful feedback and comments from people here. In particular, Gareth Trahan has been very helpful. But we're trying to think about these issues and do the right thing when we deploy these agents commercially. So that brings me, on this topic of ethics, to this kind of the title of the talk, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Like, AI is getting more and more powerful, and it's increasingly important for us to think about how it should properly be used and what constraints should be put on it. And I spent a long time talking about that with a bunch of people in the computer science tea room, and I have to shout out my colleagues here. These are colleagues who I'm particularly fond of, and I really, really appreciate these little chats that we've had. However, at a certain point, after I vented my concerns for quite a while about this topic, my great friend and collaborator, Brendan, told me, I can't remember the exact words, but along the lines of stop whinging about it and do something about it. And that was a good little prompt that made me actually start some projects in this area. So that was how the Otago Defence League was born. And so this is this interdisciplinary group of defense against the dark arts people. We've got Colin Gavican from law, who's here, and James McLaurin, who can't be here. Our thoughts are going out to James, but he can't be here today. But he's from philosophy, and he contributed a sort of practical ethics component to this, which is super important. So we've done all sorts of things. We started off by founding a discussion group, and this discussion group was intended to be extremely broad and go right across departments in the university. And we had people not just from philosophy and from law, but from economics and management and marketing and psychology and tourism and many, many other places. Information science, of course, although that's wildly different from computer science, of course. We know that. So I felt when we ran this group, I really felt for the first time that I was in a university rather than just a department, because we had discussions with people from all over the university. And the nature of AI impacts and AI ethics is that it's incredibly interdisciplinary. And there's no way around. You need discussion involving many, many people from many different areas of expertise. And we really felt that we had this interesting group of people here at Otago. So that led into a very interesting project that Colin applied for from the New Zealand Law Foundation. And that ran for 3 years, and we did some very interesting work relating to AI and the law in New Zealand. So it had a New Zealand focus, and we were extremely lucky to have two fantastic researchers, John Zarilli and Joy Liddicoat, who are probably online. So big ups to them. And I won't talk too much about what we did, but the whole of AI ethics for me is all about sort of worries. You need to articulate certain worries and make sure things are all right. So one of the questions that we thought about was, how should governments use AI systems or machine learning systems, predictive models, that kind of stuff? And we were focusing on New Zealand, so we were thinking about New Zealand government departments. And we came up with all sorts of recommendations, but one common idea was that there should be sort of like common standards for use of predictive models, which encompasses old-fashioned statistical models and more sort of flashy modern neural network models too, deep learning models. And we wanted to make sure that there was auditing in areas related to bias and transparency, and also this more less commonly studied one of human control. Is the person who's using this model really aware of what's going on, or are they just on autopilot? So we wanted to make sure that that was part of the question that was discussed in audits. Then another topic we thought about is another of these worries that people have about AI. What's AI going to do to our jobs? Is it going to take all our jobs? What's going to happen to work, human work? How's that's going to change? And so on that one, we were thinking about AI systems that were used all over the work cycle, so partly to do with recruitment. AI systems take the job of taking all the CVs and skimming through them and producing a long list for you. They even do some early kind of interviewing. So that's one thing. It's like, is that okay? Do we want AI systems to be involved in helping us choose? Is there issues with bias that might arise there? How can you audit that? How can you check? Then another thing is that a lot of jobs these days, you might actually say that the employees are managed by AI systems, or at least by algorithms, like in the gig economy, like Uber, for instance. Uber drivers get sent somewhere not by a human manager. They're allocated tasks and jobs by a computer. And then the computer is also involved in evaluating how well they're performing. So is that stressful to be evaluated by a machine rather than a person? Is that kind of degrading to the dignity of workers in any way? So that was another question. And we're also interested more broadly in the impacts of AI on consumers and on society. So that was another topic. And I'll conclude, and as part of that law project, we founded this Centre for AI and Public Policy here at Otago, and it really has been quite a focus, not just within Otago, but more broadly in New Zealand, and I hope that will continue. And we also had an impact on the government in a few ways, and the most kind of like sort of concrete one was this algorithm charter that was produced in 2020, where the report that we wrote was kind of a founding document behind this, and it's one of the first sort of charters for how to use predictive models that is intended to apply to all government departments, right across government. So it was quite an innovative thing. And we also produced a book, which was the main running on this was done by John Torelli, our postdoc, but we were all involved. And it's an interesting kind of way of offering advice to citizens about AI and the thought and the issues that arise that people need to think about. Because we want the discussion about these questions about the impacts of AI not just to happen within industry or in universities, but in the community more broadly. So we intended to produce something, and we've done quite a lot of this outreach type stuff. Finally, I'll talk about one other project that's taking a lot of my time at the moment, which is to do with social media and the governance of social media. This is a project that's quite international, so it's not just New Zealand anymore. And social media companies are like big targets, big multinational targets. And so you need big sort of consortia of people who are thinking about how to regulate those companies. And again, it has to be widely interdisciplinary. So down here we've got lawyers, people who specialize in AI and law. Down the bottom here, these are some of Colin's students. One of them I co-supervised as well. And then we've got a bunch of AI people, including some quite heavy hitters. We've got Stuart Russell here. We've got Ricardo Baeza-Yates over here. So this is quite a high-level project in some ways, and it's got quite a lot of attention internationally. And I've just finished just by concluding, by just describing some of the things that are coming up in this project. So the project is all about the AI systems that social media companies use to choose what you see in your feed. Like when you open Facebook, you get this feed of items. It's personalized to you, right? And what's happened is that some AI system in Facebook has learned the kind of things that you like and that keep you on the platform, and it gives you more of that stuff, basically. So this is an AI system that's in wide use. It's all over the place, and it's having huge impacts, but we don't really know what those impacts are. So talk about dark arts. This is really the dark. And what we're interested in doing here is trying to bring some light into this area and try to find ways that companies can can show the effects of these systems on users. There's lots of people who try to study these effects from the outside, but we're interested in having companies themselves, using their more powerful methods, work out in particular whether there's any tendency, which is something that people often think about and you often see in the media, is there any tendency for these algorithms to push people in the direction of harmful content, for instance, towards extremism or towards polarization? And companies haven't as yet really engaged with that question, but they could. So our project's all about trying to interact with companies pre-legislatively, before there's any rules about this, to try and design sensible rules about how they can be transparent about that question. Anyway, I think that's it for me. Enough from the Defence League. I just want to say thank you to Otago, and this is my final thought. I remember when I first arrived here, having done all these interesting like undergrad, postgrad, postdoc stuff, it was all very nice, but coming to Otago, I felt this enormous freedom. I really felt a sense of freedom. It's like you have the freedom of academia. You can decide what you want to study, what questions you find are interesting. And I really appreciate the freedom that I've been given here at Otago, not only to do AI, but also the freedom to be a little critical about the discipline and think about how it should be limited or constrained. So anyway, that's the end of my lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. So it's up to me to do the outro, which I was told is the most difficult thing. But I have in my mind a sort of model of an ideal academic. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time to measure Ali against that model. So number one is of my ideal academic is that they have this single-minded devotion to one or two basic questions, I guess. And Ali mentioned it in the talk. He said he spent 14 years thinking about a man grabs a cup. So I think that's a pretty deep, single-minded devotion. So he spent basically his whole career thinking about two things. One is how the brain works and how can we simulate that. And more recently is what do we do when we figure that stuff out and how do we control the machines that we create. So I think on this score, on the single-minded devotion, and he's really focused on this the whole time, I give him a sustained, outstanding leadership and contribution. And what comes after that is really an ability to talk about your research, which Ali can do at length, in excruciating detail, day after day after day at morning tea. And so I can give him a sustained, outstanding leadership and contribution on that score as well. The third criteria for my ideal academic is absent-mindedness. I walked over with Ali earlier. We were there's a green room back here, I never knew. We were standing in the green room and the lecture theatre technician came up and said, "Oh, Ali, can I grab your device and I'll connect it up and make sure it's all working?" And Ali looks around. "Did I leave it in your office, Brendan, when I came and got you?" "Well, I don't remember." "Oh, actually, I don't think I brought it at all." So we now got 10 minutes to go. He doesn't have his computer. So he runs back to his office, picks it up and runs back, sweating, and then dons his robes. So on absent-mindedness, I also give Ali a sustained, outstanding leadership and competence. And the last one is a questionable dress sense, and I'm just going to leave that that there. So, and now of course the title of professor is reserved for people who meet these criteria with the highest standards, and I'm very pleased that Ali's title has now caught up with his performance in these areas. He's really been an excellent colleague over the last 25 years, and we're very, very sorry to see him go, but I think you'd all agree that he's given an excellent talk today. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and I'd just like to thank him again and wish him well, with a lot of sadness for his next chapter of his life in Wellington and at Vic. So it's a token of the university's gratitude, Ali. Thank you very much. And my last job is just to thank the audience, both online and in person. Thank you very much for coming along. And for the people who are here, I'd like to invite them to come along to the staff club for some drinks and a few nibbles. And for the people who are online, you can have drinks and nibbles wherever you are, but we probably won't see you. So, kia ora, thank you very much.